The idea for web app is that, if you're working on a full stack web app and you're reviewing your coworkers' change, you can see the check marks in GitHub, but it's much easier just to, make scripts that play around with the website on your behalf. That's what we facilitate. So if you make a change, we'll spin up the environment with that change and let your coworkers look at it to tell you whether the change is good or not.
Hey, this is Brian, and you're listening to JAMstack Radio, a bi-weekly series where we discuss the JAMstack, a new way of building websites and apps that are fast, secure, and simple to work with. JAMstack Radio is brought to you by Heavybit, a program dedicated to helping startups take their developer products to market. For more information, visit heavybit.com. If you're interested in being a guest on the show, or if you'd like to suggest a topic, find us on Twitter at JAMstack Radio. Welcome to another installment of JAMstack Radio. On the line, we got Colin Chartier. Colin, how you doing?
I'm all right. Thanks for having me.
Perfect. And so you're here on the podcast. You're actually you're introduced through a mutual connection, and here to talk about Web App I/O. So before we jump into that, I actually wanted to just find out who's Colin. What are you doing, and how did you get here?
Yeah, well, I'm currently in startup life, of course. I've been an executive at various startups for the past 5 years, so that, as you might expect, takes up most of my time. Recreationally, I run sometimes. I've been learning to cook, as most other people during the pandemic.
Yep.
And I'm a recovering tap dancer.
Tap dancer? Okay. You can't just drop that in the middle of the bio.
Yeah.
Did you do that in school or growing up?
Yeah, I started when I was maybe 8, and then I kept going through university.
Okay. That is quite the skill set, especially if you're an executive at a startup. So like if you're doing your pitch deck, I imagine if you pull out the tap shoes, that is an automatic next round of funding right there.
Oh yeah, my advice to everyone who asks how to raise, just channel your inner Fred Astaire.
We don't have to talk about tap dancing. I actually want to talk about your history a little bit about your startups and being executives. So like, were you at previous startups that maybe people have heard of?
I guess potentially certain niches. I was CTO at a company called ParseHub.
Okay.
And they're probably a top 5 web scraping SaaS. If you've ever had to scrape lots of things from the internet, you might have heard of ParseHub. And I guess right after ParseHub, I'm now working at Web App I/O, which you might not have heard yet, but you will in time.
Yeah. Well, I'm looking forward to learning more about that. So let's just jump in and find out. I'll just ask the question, what is Web App I/O?
Yeah, so the idea for Web App is that CI is great and all. And, if you're working on a full stack web app and you're reviewing your coworkers' change, you can see the check marks in GitHub, but it's much easier just to play around with the website or, make scripts that play around with the website on your behalf. That's what we facilitate. So if you make a change, we'll spin up the environment with that change and let your coworkers look at it to tell you whether the change is good or not.
So are we talking sandbox environments? So folks can just go and see this web app live in sort of like some pseudo staged environment?
Yeah, it's kind of halfway between Netlify and Circle CI, if that makes sense.
Okay.
So yeah, there's like a configuration file. Every time you push, it automatically gets created. You don't have to deal with the cloud credentials or whatever. It's not a production environment. Like you probably wouldn't send customers there. And it kind of acts like Heroku dynos, where if you're not using them, they'll just sleep.
Yeah.
And then when you request them, you'll see a spinner, and then they'll wake up and you can play around with them.
Okay. And that sounds like a really interesting use case too as well, because like if I'm on a engineering team, an organization, like I want to have, like I like having the Netlify deploys to the site so that way I can go through and click through and like see if things are still up and running. But you mentioned something interesting where you said the halfway point between Circle CI and Netlify. So like what extras are you getting when reaching for a web app I/O?
Yeah. The big difference between us and something like Netlify is that we don't do production hosting, so we can be, I guess, sneakier with the build speeds. So in particular, we take memory snapshots of things as they build. So like maybe the prototypical example is you start Postgres, you start your backend, you start your front end, and then you play around with the front end, interacting with the back end, interacting with the database, and then you see if it works kind of as a whole package. Since we take memory snapshots, you don't have to do that whole process that takes 20 minutes every time. You just push, it loads a snapshot of the database and backend, copies in your new front end changes, and then gives you a link, and you can immediately start running with a new copy of the database and with potentially the migrations or the backend branch you're working on or whatever.
Okay, that's intriguing. So like setting up local environments with development databases is something that
folks do and set up and sort of set it and forget it. But to recreate that in I don't know if I'm using the right term for a sandbox environment, so a web app IO, it sounds like y'all set that up through some YAML up front.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I personally didn't like YAML when I was first picking out like the MVP. So think less circleci.yaml, more a Docker file. So just have the steps top down. It snapshots things automatically as it builds, and then it figures out what step it can skip to the next time you push. So you don't have to micromanage the cache keys or whatever you'd usually have to do.
Yeah. Okay. Got it. That's what you were talking about, the memory snapshot. So is this across team? So if I open up a PR and I've got it working and it's got the sort of all the staging data and everything like that, and people now can go test it, my teammate now has access to that same staging data if they were to go to click that link?
Yeah. So it's just, again, pretty similar to Netlify. You have internet visible links. They're just embedded directly in the pull request. We actually embed a screenshot of the landing page for your specific change. Yeah. People click the screenshot and it just sends them to, the internet visible per commit environment.
I love it.
And then if you break it, you can just rebuild it. Yeah. There's no customer screaming if you break the staging database or run a bad migration or something.
Yeah. And I mean, so now my brain's is sort of rolling through all these use cases of what I'd be doing this day to day. Like I know whenever I go to squash a bug, like there's like a very specific use case of how this sort of happened in production. And I need to reproduce that and then convince the rest of the team that I've solved the problem. So are you saying that if I set up a snapshot leveraging like the data that is necessary to showcase that I solved this problem, are folks able to like go in there and sort of see how I basically, I'm thinking of like when you show houses, like you're staging up the house and people can walk through and see like, wow, I didn't know you could put a TV over the fireplace, which now everybody does. Like now you get to go and see, okay, TV over the fireplace, that was what was broken before. Let's just now hyper focus on clicking in the environment and make sure that works. Like I'm able to stage the setup in that way.
Yeah. A super common thing that like we didn't even think of this when we were first making the technology, but I guess it kind of evolved alongside it, is you can take like a snapshot, like a database dump of a production database, and then you can anonymize it. So there's, you just make like a script that goes through all the rows, swaps out the names with fake names, and then you get this thing that looks like production that's GDPR compliant, and then you just throw that in a bucket. And then for your build script, you can say, start the database, download this dump, which might take 5 minutes, load this dump, which might take 10 minutes, and then take a memory snapshot of it. And then the next time you push, you get another copy of that seeded database. And you can even test things like, does the migration I just made actually work against production data, or does it violate some foreign keys or something? Because you load the database snapshot, then you run the differential, things for your specific change.
Yeah, that's extremely powerful. That just the one script of you saying that you could take a snapshot, replace the names to make it GDPR compliant, and then have that reusable for future and more instances of like being able to test data is extremely powerful. Because like right now I'm working on a problem for my side project, which is open source, and I am seeding the data with actual real live data, which is GitHub data to GitHub repos. And I have definitely like wiped out the database multiple times while testing this. And it'd be so much easier if I could just like grab a bunch of random projects and then test to see if the interaction of my project works, something that's close to production. Yeah, you're basically solving a bunch of steps in my day-to-day workflow, which is pretty awesome. I wanted to actually touch on something that I saw on your website too as well, which it's a pretty bold thing to put on the website, which is review your code like Facebook does. Can we get into like what that means and what's the history of that tagline?
Sure. So, I mean, I guess most developers probably know that, the FANGs, in particular, Facebook and Google have just like these huge teams of specifically developer engineers that all they do is make developer tooling for the rest of the developers. Because, I think Google has 100,000 developers now. So, like from Google's perspective, it makes sense to put 1,000 developers working on developer tools so that when you push and you open a pull request, if it's like 1% faster for 100,000 developers to merge their pull requests, then it's a big win for Google because it's the equivalent of hiring like hundreds of people. So the big FANGs have figured out a lot of these things: the snapshotting, the loading database snapshots, making ephemeral environments, pull request automation in general. Really really good comprehensive tests that tell you exactly what line number you caused a bug on, things like that. But if you're working at basically any other company than a FANG, like you don't get all those things. You get some glimpse of it with, like a GitHub Marketplace or with like GitHub Actions or with, like these configurable tools, but you still eventually need to hire someone to set up all of these pipelines. And you basically never get as good of an experience as, like Facebook gives you. So we're hoping long-term to let everyone have that experience of, you push something, it's broken. Your code reviewer can tell you exactly how it's broken, on what lines, and you can get it, shown to customers the same day you made the change instead of, a week and a half later when you finally get the last reviewer to look at it.
Yeah. And I've been at so my day job being GitHub. I've definitely seen the evolution of us get to a point where we have this sort of behemoth of a DevOps pipeline that just gets something out the door or just reviewed and tested and provision things. And there's a whole team that does a bunch of stuff. I don't know what they're doing, but they make it easier for me to get my one-off DevRel application up in production. And I definitely see a trend of like folks coming off of FANG companies and then recreating like startups or one-off tools or open source projects to solve problems. So I'm curious, like you and your co-founders, or you all have that experience coming from FANG companies, or like I guess my real question is like, where would this inspiration come from to solve this problem?
Sure. So the specific problem of needing, snapshots of your database and wanting to make like snapshots of your environment to run tests against, in particular browser automation, and have like preview links, was from my experience at my last, being CTO of a SaaS company. You have the same sorts of goals that Google does. Like I've hired 10 engineers. I want all of my engineers to be 10% faster so that I don't have to hire more people to get more output. So I was solving a lot of these things kind of on the back end. And like I was looking at all the cutting edge, the FANGs all make papers to exemplify how good it is to work there or whatever. Like you have the engineering blogs, you have the,
yes,
this is how we take memory snapshots of Kubernetes clusters, and here's how we restore, or here's how we forked Postgres to,
This is the one reason why I went to OSCON and all the O'Reilly conferences previously, which RIP, they don't exist anymore. But because you would get all the FANG employees talk about how their big, hairy issues. Like, I guess one of the most popular ones is like which is not related to this, but the Chaos Monkey and Netflix.
Yeah.
The amount of people who tried to recreate that at their own companies after watching the one talk years ago, and now entire startups built on that same idea. Absolutely amazing. So it makes tons of sense.
Yeah. So, I mean, I had that experience. My co-founder didn't work as a programmer, but she worked at various tech companies. And I guess she worked on the other side where, she was asking people to get features made so that marketing could launch something, and the developers would take 3 weeks to even get it, a fresh feature with no users, to the point that it could be shown to users to gather feedback. Would take 3 weeks at a fast-moving tech company, in quotes.
Yeah.
So she was really on board with the vision of build something, show it to users as quickly as possible because it's not broken, and then iterate from there.
Yeah, that's amazing, because just before this call, I was pairing with one of my coworkers on a problem where it basically, essentially, the age-old problem, it works on my machine, literally, but I could not get it to work on their machine. And we went through all the list of the things, trying to figure out what's happening, and kind of summarize it all to permissions inside the repository we're trying to access data from. It's a GitHub problem we were working on. So we just use repos as test databases. And we're now in our third week pairing on this thing, because it's not a high priority problem. It's just a side project. And it came to the third week. We finally figured out, permissions. I have permissions you don't have. We should probably fix that. And based on the error message and everything like that, we didn't quite understand what was happening up until very recently. But even having just environments with the same test users and to be able to have that consistent, for example, in Google Chrome, because I did a lot of web app development, the drop down to create different profiles in Chrome so that way you can have different accounts for the same thing you're testing, that is annoying. And I would definitely, which is not a service that you take care of. Google, I think, sort of takes care of that natively, but in the browser. But just having extra user accounts to test is quite annoying to set up every time I want to test a feature.
Funny you should mention that, but I'm sure most people at this point have heard of like BrowserStack or Percy or like Cypress.
Yeah.
There's a bunch of these like browser automation frameworks that have popped up since like, I want to say 2015.
Yeah.
Where, once you could do headless Chrome, everyone wanted to put Chrome in a Docker container and then like try to log in and make sure that login still worked. But I think it's really evolved into making sure that it also works on Linux Firefox and iOS Safari and Chrome on Windows. So these permutations of browsers, people want to try them on every pull request. And they can sort of do that for front-end stuff with, like Netlify or Vercel or their own PR bot or whatever. But it's really difficult to spin up an environment for a pull request to the point that you can actually do browser automation. Like, does the dropdown work on all 10 combinations of browsers that we want to support? So that's another thing our users have been using the environments for, because you make one, you do the database, you start the backend, you start the front end, and then we have a split directive. So you can make 10 copies of it. And each of the 10 copies, you can test a different permutation of browser and operating system with BrowserStack or something like that. You can use your existing tool, but you just magically get an environment to run it in.
Yeah. And that's, now I'm just thinking of another example that I did with Playwright. So the headless Chrome browsers and being able to, I guess Playwright's more than just Chrome. It also does Edge and Firefox as well. But testing to make sure stuff's rendering, because like how many times I've definitely had a Safari bug or something even in Firefox or Brave, because everybody's got their own flavor on top of Chromium. Well, Safari's not Chromium, but you know what I mean? Basically, everybody's got their own skin and how things work that you just don't know until you open up something that's not Chrome and see, oh, wow, we definitely did not make this feature correctly.
Yeah. Even us as a startup, we don't necessarily do as much browser testing as we should because, you don't have the cycles to set up all of the different harnesses. But we do have a test that just clicks every page. Like it basically like loads the landing page, finds all the links on the landing page, clicks them all, and then it just like makes a tree of all of the visitable links on the web page, like from the main landing page. So it clicks the dashboard, and from the dashboard, it clicks all the tabs, and from all the tabs, it clicks everything. And it's basically like a 50-line Cypress file. It's super, super simple. But all it does is it makes sure there's no 404s on any of the pages, and there's no browser errors. And I think that's caught more bugs than almost any other test, probably all the other tests combined, because most front-end bugs end up being like, oh, it, you broke the compilation on the account page, and now no one would have been able to log in.
Yeah, and it's something that you kind of want to know when login's broken. You need to know that at the time of PR rather than when it goes up in production. So you mentioned Cypress too a couple times. I'm curious, how do you interact with web app? How do you get started? Like, what are the sort of steps? If I have a project, what am I looking for to get started to work with it?
Yeah, I mean, if you've ever set up CI on a project, it's very similar. If you think about setting up, like a build process, you'd have your configuration to, these are the steps I need to do to build. You'd have your like Docker file or whatever to specify how to build the image. And then when you push, you'd install it onto your GitHub repository. And then every time you push, it would run. Ours is only 2 steps. So it's even simpler than that method because we combined the YAML with the Docker file. So all you need to do is install us. We're on the GitHub Marketplace. I think we're top 10 CI plugins, I want to say. So you install it on your GitHub repository. You create a file named layer file that just contains the directives. And then we do all the memory snapshotting magically. One of the directives is expose website. So it's like a Docker file, but we've extended it to have extra things. So if you want just an ephemeral environment, you make a layer file that's like, install Docker Compose, run Docker Compose up-d, expose website, localhost 3000. And then that's it. Every time you push from then on, you get a link in your pull requests to view that environment.
Excellent. Yeah. So I'm definitely going to be checking this out. You mentioned the marketplace. I've got definitely a project. Like we just found you're one simple example of finding broken links. I just got accepted a PR on one of my projects, my doc site actually, because I had a couple broken links because we moved stuff around. And, you try to catch all that stuff when you're reviewing PRs, but it always is going to be the case where there's something that slips through. So yeah, Colin, I appreciate you coming and chatting about that. Anything else you want to cover about web app IO that maybe we didn't get a chance to touch on?
I mean, the only, I guess, remaining thing is broadly what DevOps means for people building web apps in general. Because I guess the question I get most often is, can I use this with GitHub Actions? Or, Am I going to have to migrate all of my GitHub Actions, like build process over to this? And I think in general, you should just choose tools that allow you to put your existing process in. If you had to switch all of your build process every time you changed cloud providers or changed like SCMs or changed from organization to individual repository, you just spend all of your time migrating things. So like the whole thesis of web app is that you can put it alongside your existing stuff. It shows up as an extra check below your GitHub Actions, below your Circle CI, below your browser stack, your Percy, or, and then if you do want to migrate things into it, it's possible, but it's not, required.
Okay. It's nice to hear that flexibility too as well. And for folks who just want to tinker with stuff, because I know back, you mentioned like 4 or 5 years ago, it seemed like with all these cloud providers, it was you choose one and that's it.
Yeah.
And I know sitting at Netlify as an early employee, we figured out the multi-cloud environments pretty quickly after you run through all the sort of free credits. And I love the fact that like even with that you're able to pick and choose what you'd like to use as your provider. And like despite vendor lock-in, like there's always workarounds. And I prefer the workarounds or just folks providing opportunity to try different providers up front, because it just seems kind of slimy getting stuck in the one provider.
Our production is a big Kubernetes cluster. It's actually a bare metal Kubernetes cluster, which no one ever advises.
Yeah.
Because the people advising you are the ones that want you to use their cloud, of course. But we had a point, like the main servers we use have, I think, 800 gigabytes of RAM, and they're like $1,000 a month-ish, which is already a pretty good deal because like cloud providers would be 3 or 4 times that. We use like a European provider called OVH for the main kind of like powerful servers to do the builds. But our provider ran out of servers in April, like because of the chip shortage in the supply chain. We were trying to get servers in April, and they said, it was impossible for us to get more servers for the next 60 days or something. And we had customers that were onboarding, so we couldn't wait 60 days. So I added servers from another provider and just glued them into the existing Kubernetes cluster, because I guess that's one of the big benefits of using Kubernetes is you can span it across multiple clouds. So I guess very similar to your experience at Netlify, where if you don't vendor lock yourself too hard, it's possible to circumvent unexpected issues with your cloud providers.
Amazing. Yeah. So again, thanks for the conversation. I did want to transition us to the picks. Folks, if you're listening and this all resonated with you, it sounds like there's some easy intros for you to try Web App IO and some of your projects. So definitely check it out. In the show notes, we'll have a link to the website, Web App IO, which is literally the website, but also Colin and his Twitter account as well to reach out, ask questions, and report back. Tell us if you like it. But now what I want to talk about is what I like, which is picks. These are jam picks, things that we're jamming on. This could be movie, food, tech related. There's not really a limitation. We've got kind of really the extensive list of previous picks and some really profound ones in the past. But if you don't mind, I'll go first. And the one pick that's kind of really taken up a lot of my time for whatever reason, I've just got a lot of free time to watch YouTube, is actually Teslas. I don't own a Tesla today, but I've done like crazy amount of research on it. I think the sort of the buzz of what's happening at Tesla and these cars in general are just, it continues to be up on to the right. I don't know. Do you drive a Tesla, Colin?
I do not.
You do not? Okay, well, you're going to get on the bandwagon soon. So what I did is I actually did a test drive in Tesla. This is my pick, is test driving Teslas in San Francisco, which I would pay for this experience. Because if you know San Francisco, there's tons of hills everywhere. Doesn't matter if you're downtown, you're a minute away from a hill. So I signed up I had like an afternoon with no meetings. And I'm like, I'm going to sign up to test drive a Tesla. Went into San Francisco, got into a Tesla, a Model Y, which absolutely a gorgeous, amazing car. It's not quite the X, but it's still a very nice crossover. And they give you 45 minutes with you and the Tesla to be able to test drive all over San Francisco. And San Francisco, most people might not know this, is 7 square miles. So you can go all around San Francisco twice in 45 minutes. And that's what I did. I went up the hills. I almost went down Lombard Street, which was like the curvy street or what. It's the famous street. But that's, even during the pandemic, that's known to be backed up with the tourists who just want to drive down there. So I was like, that would be my whole time just waiting to go down the street. It'd be an amazing experience in a Tesla, to be quite honest. But I'll probably do it again. I'll probably go down. That'll be my goal, to go down that street. But Yeah, I was actually really impressed. If anybody's never looked into Tesla, I don't own stock in Tesla or anything like that. I just one day was like, hey, I should look into this because everybody raves about Teslas, and now I'll be buying a Tesla. It's on pre-order for 6 months because chip shortages and all that other stuff. So I'm looking forward to it.
Here in Canada, you've started seeing Teslas. It's certainly less prevalent than the Bay, but I think like in the past, I want to say 2 years, you've started seeing more and more to the point that like maybe once a day I'll see a Tesla.
Yeah, they're everywhere.
I think as the number goes up, hopefully there'll be more chargers. That's the big the big problem here is that like, most garages don't have chargers, and it's already hard to get parking in downtown Toronto. So
yeah, that is a challenge. I do benefit being in the Bay Area. There's quite a few chargers in the area. And then Tesla's trying to do this whole thing with the solar panels on the roof and then the superchargers at the home. So yeah, there's a lot of benefit, but I think Tesla just recently they're moving headquarters to Texas now. They're still going to be in the Bay Area, but I think you're going to see the expanse across the US at least. I can't speak for Canada, but we'll see.
Have you tried driving in a Waymo in Austin yet?
I haven't. That's a thing?
Yeah, there's I guess Waymo has been doing driverless car tests.
Yeah.
Like there's like the driverless taxi that you can drive around with. So I think
okay, got it.
Test drive a Tesla and drive a Waymo are the two car experiences.
Excellent. I vaguely remember this actually being a thing, but yeah, no, I've not tried that out, but I'm going to put it on my list because I checked off the box for the Tesla, and now I got to go to Waymo.
Yeah, well, I guess once you get your Tesla, you have to practice, and you can go to Las Vegas, go a little further.
Yeah, exactly. Cool. Do you have any picks to share with the audience?
I recently got an espresso maker. It's called a Breville Bambino. It's like a single shot espresso maker, and it has this little steam nozzle that you can use to foam milk. But I bought it just because I like espresso, and I guess I was kind of tired of drip coffee, and I wanted some slightly more interesting coffee in the mornings. But I realized that because it has this nozzle that comes off of the right side, and it has hot water for Americanos, and it has steam for like steaming milk, you can actually make all sorts of things. Like you can make bowl noodles, you can make tea, you can make, like I have a teapot, and you just put like loose leaf tea in the teapot's like a basket, and then you aim the hot water jet at it, and you just turn the hot water on, and it automatically turns off after like a cup or two. So you can just press the hot water button and leave, and you come back with a cup of tea. Versus, having to boil the water or microwaving the cup or,
Yeah.
It's a whole thing. And it's always exactly 90 degrees. So it's perfect for most tea.
That is amazing. And I've definitely seen quite a few people pick up fancier coffee setups, especially being home. I lucked out during the entire pandemic. I lived across the street from a coffee shop. So I would just peek out the window and see if there was a line out the door. And if there wasn't, that was my life hack for coffee. Well, I appreciate you chatting with us. I am actually going to look up this Bambino coffee machine, espresso machine rather, and I'm also going to check out Web App because I think I've got a use case for this as well at work. So with that being said, Colin, thanks so much for the conversation. Listeners, check out everything we talked about and keep spreading the jam.
That's all the time we have for today. If you're interested in being a guest on the show, or if you'd like to suggest a topic, find us on Twitter at JAMstack Radio. To learn more about Heavybit, visit heavybit.com. And while you're there, check out their library. It's packed with amazing talks on sales, marketing, product, and general management from founders of developer tools companies and other industry leaders.